How crowded is the Camino de Santiago these days anyway? Is the Camino completely overcrowded, or can you still enjoy it? And which Camino routes are actually the most popular with pilgrims in 2026? I'll give you the answers to these frequently asked questions in this video. The official pilgrim numbers are actually easily accessible to everyone via the website of the Pilgrims Office in Santiago de Compostela. At the beginning of each new year, you can check there to see how many people were on the Camino the previous year, what time of year they traveled, where they started, which route they chose, how old they were, which country they came from, and so on. So all interesting facts. At the same time, I must admit that some statistics can be misinterpreted without a closer look or prior knowledge. That's always the thing with statistics, as we already learned in school. And unfortunately, that also applies to the Camino. So in this video, let's take a look together at what the numbers for 2025 mean and what conclusions we can draw for the year 2026 for the Camino in Spain and Portugal. And before we get started, just a quick note. If you'd like to read my full analysis again at your leisure, you'll find the link to the article right below this video, as well as the link to the official pilgrim statistics. And even if you're one of the many silent viewers who don't comment on the video, which is totally fine, you can still help me by just clicking the like button and subscribing to the channel. It's free and only takes 2 seconds. Just pause the video for a moment and then we'll get right into it. How crowded was the Camino de Santiago in the year 2025? A look at the official pilgrim statistics from the Pilgrims Office in Santiago de Compostela reveals that the Camino set another pilgrim record in 2025. Because compared to the previous year, 2024, another 30,000 people made the pilgrimage to the cathedral in Santiago de Compostela, registered officially, and collected their pilgrim certificate, which is an absolute record. In total, 530,993 people officially completed the Camino in Spain or Portugal in 2025, according to statistics. That means over 500,000 people, which is really quite a lot. The actual number is likely much higher, as the official figures only include pilgrims who actually registered and walked all the way to Santiago. This means that all pilgrims who, for example, only completed a section of the Camino are not even included in these statistics. From this, we can conclude that the Camino is indeed getting a bit more crowded every year, and the interest and fascination with this special long-distance trail remains very high in 2026. Are you curious to experience this adventure for yourself and walk the Camino on your own? Then feel free to sign up for my free email course, where you'll get all the essential basic information. And you can find the link for that below this video. Which routes of the Way of St. James are the most popular among pilgrims? The statistics have shown that in the year 2025, once again, by far, the Camino Francés was the most popular Way of St. James among all pilgrims. About 46% of all pilgrims chose this route in Spain. And that's the route that Kerkeling walked back then on his Camino. But it's very important to know that many of these people who went on the Camino Francés didn't walk the entire way at all, but only the last 100 kilometers. So don't let these statistics deceive you at first glance. The second most popular in terms of pilgrim numbers in 2025 was again the Camino Portugues, the Portuguese way. A total of 36% of all pilgrims reached Santiago via the Camino Portugues route, so more than every third pilgrim chose the Way of St. James in Portugal. It's important to know here that this 36% includes both the inland version of the Camino Portugues and the coastal path, the Camino Portugues de la Costa. So both routes together account for 36% of the pilgrims. In third place in the ranking of the most popular routes, quite a bit further behind, is the Camino Inglés with about 5.7% of the pilgrim volume. And this Way of St. James is relatively short, as it's only 120 kilometers long. With a 5.26% share of pilgrims, the Camino Primitivo comes in fourth place, which is generally considered the most demanding Way of St. James of them all. And in fifth place, with about 4% of pilgrims, is the Camino del Norte, the coastal path in northern Spain, which is beautiful but can also be very physically demanding and challenging at times. More information on all these popular routes of the Way of St. James can also be found on my pilgrim blog and in my ebooks, and the link for that is located below this video. Which way of St. James has gained the most popularity among pilgrims in recent years? That's clearly the Portuguese way from Porto to Santiago de Compostela. And it now has a 36% share of all the routes combined. Why is this route becoming more and more popular? In my view, there are several reasons for this. For one thing, in terms of the stage profile and elevation profile, this route isn't incredibly strenuous, so there are no very high mountains. Also, the route is relatively short. It's 240 kilometers from Porto to Santiago de Compostela. And that means that even inexperienced hikers can usually complete this route in about 2 weeks. And that's ideal, of course, because not everyone can clear 4 or 5 or 6 weeks at a time. And there is also a third reason why this route is becoming more popular. It's simply the fact that there's a coastal version that leads right along the Atlantic Ocean in Portugal, with views of the water and the beach, and the infrastructure on the coastal path, but also on both versions overall. There's also the inland version, has simply been greatly expanded in recent years. This means the signposting has improved, there are more pilgrim hostels, the quality of the hostels has improved, and overall, the infrastructure of this route has just gotten much better, making it even more pleasant or easier to walk this path. If this way of St. James in Portugal appeals to you too, then feel free to take a look at our ebook for preparation, with accommodation tips or our even more detailed preparation course. You can find links to both of these below this video. And if you walk the Camino Portugues in the summer, be aware that it's no longer an insider tip among the ways of St. James. So it can definitely get quite crowded there at times now. Why does the way of St. James Camino del Norte in northern Spain only have a 4% share of pilgrims? That's a good question, and I think there are several reasons for it. On the one hand, this way of St. James is beautiful because it leads right along the sea on the northern Spanish coast past great beaches. But it is also, at least at times, physically very demanding and very strenuous because there's just a lot of up and down. There are many mountains, and you simply have a lot of elevation gain to cover. Another reason is that you simply need a lot of time for the entire Camino del Norte. The total distance is 800 kilometers, and for that, you simply need 5 weeks, give or take. And that's just not something you can do in 2 weeks, and not everyone has that much time all at once. If you've been on the Camino del Norte yourself in the summer and got the feeling that it's actually relatively full or even quite crowded in parts, how does that fit with a pilgrim share of only 4% compared to the other routes? Well, then you feel the same way I do. And I think the explanation lies in the fact that although far fewer people are traveling on the Camino del Norte in terms of total pilgrim numbers than, for example, on the Camino Francés, but there are also far fewer hostels and pilgrim accommodations. And that leads to the pilgrim accommodations each being similarly full in the end as on the Camino Francés. And if you don't know the Camino del Norte yet, but are interested in this exciting way of St. James, then feel free to stop by my blog, where you'll find some of my experience reports. Or check out my ebook. I've linked both for you below the video, as well as my more detailed video preparation course for the Camino del Norte. The way of St. James set a new pilgrimage record in 2025. In total, over 500,000 people were on the way of St. James routes, which is 30,000 more people than in the previous year. Does this mean as a result that the way of St. James is completely overcrowded everywhere? I would say, based on my experience, yes and no. So yes and no. What do I mean by that? On the one hand, it's true, it's obvious when we look at the pilgrimage statistics that the path is simply getting busier year after year. On the other hand, you really have to look closely at the statistics, and then you see that of this 500,000 people who are on the way, many people don't walk the entire way of St. James at all, but really only the last 100 kilometers or 130 kilometers or 150 kilometers or the last 200 kilometers. And that, of course, makes a difference. And that also means looking at it the other way, that, for example, the entire Camino Francés isn't full from start to finish. Because if we now, for example, pick out the graphic from the official pilgrimage statistics with the list of all starting points and locations for pilgrims in 2025, then it's noticeable that Sarria, I don't know exactly how it's pronounced, is simply the place where most pilgrims started walking. To be precise, there were 162,000 pilgrims who started in Sarria last year. The official starting point of the Camino Francés, however, is in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port on the border between Spain and France, and only 30,000 people officially started there, for example. From that, you can see that the theory that the entire Camino is overcrowded is simply not valid. But anyone who doesn't look at these statistics properly, but only sees the numbers at a glance, might believe that the Camino Francés is simply completely overcrowded, which isn't true, as we've now seen. If you're also interested in the Camino Francés, you'll find a lot of info about this Way of St. James on my blog, as well as specific tips for preparation and accommodations in my ebook. You can find the link to it below the video. So now I'd like to show you some fun facts and interesting facts and anecdotes from the pilgrimage statistics as well. Because did you know that of all the pilgrims who were on the Way of St. James last year and arrived in Santiago de Compostela, only 4.4% were German? I think that's pretty crazy, because I don't know about you, but my feeling is when you talk about the Way of St. James, that you often somehow think that every second person there actually comes from Germany. But statistically speaking, it's not even 5% Germans. The nation where most pilgrims come from is actually Spain itself, because they have a pilgrim share of 43%, I believe it was. So almost every second pilgrim on the Way of St. James is actually Spanish. Another fun fact about the Way of St. James: did you know that last year more women than men were traveling on the Way of St. James? As in previous years, a small trend has formed there. Although the ratio is almost balanced between men and women, it's not completely. Because according to statistics, 53.44% of the pilgrims last year were female. And the men accordingly account for about 46% of the pilgrim share. By the way, more and more girls and women are daring to walk the path completely alone on their own. And if you're also interested in that, then maybe this ebook is also for you, where we interviewed and questioned 15 women who pilgrimaged alone about their experiences. And it's turned out to be a really great ebook with lots of authentic travel reports, with beautiful things, with painful things. So feel free to take a look. You can find the link to this ebook under this video. How old are the pilgrims on the Way of St. James actually? A look at the official statistics shows that the age ratio is relatively balanced on the Way of St. James. So if you previously believed that only older people go on pilgrimages, or that only young people walk the Way of St. James, then you were mistaken in both cases. Because in fact, statistically speaking, the proportion of 18 to 45-year-old pilgrims is similarly high as the proportion of 46 to 65-year-olds. But also beyond that and below that, there are many people who walk the Way of St. James, so certainly also many seniors who are on the road in Spain and Portugal, but also many young people under 18 years of age who walk the Way of St. James, sometimes even in school classes. Specifically in numbers, of the 530,000 pilgrims who were on the road last year on the Way of St. James, at least 58,000 were actually over 65 years old. So about every 9th pilgrim was already a retiree and still walked the Way of St. James. So respect for that. At the other end of the age spectrum, we also have many young people, namely 43,000 pilgrims who arrived in Santiago de Compostela last year, were even younger than 18 years old. If you would like to follow and read my analysis of all pilgrim statistics and pilgrim numbers again at your leisure, you are welcome to do so on my blog. You can find the link to it under this video, and there is also the link to the source where I got these numbers from, namely the Pilgrim Office in Santiago. What trends and developments do I personally expect for the Camino de Santiago in 2026? I would predict that perhaps another pilgrim record could be set, so that once again a few thousand more people than the year before could be on the Camino de Santiago in 2026. I could also imagine that many people will again only walk the last 100 kilometers, 120 kilometers on the Camino Francés, and not the entire Camino de Santiago, so that especially the last section could get really, really crowded. And I could also imagine that the Portuguese way from Porto to Santiago could gain even more popularity in 2026, because it's just ideal for people who are enthusiastic about hiking and pilgrimage, but don't have much experience yet, as the path isn't that demanding. Then it's also ideal in terms of time, because you only need 2 weeks. That works well for many who can't free up that much time all at once. And then there's also this coastal path in Portugal, which is increasingly well developed and simply attracts many people. That's why I could imagine that the Camino Portugues will continue to grow in popularity among all the Camino de Santiago routes in the year 2026. And I could also imagine that this year, at least some pilgrims will increasingly look for counter-cyclical strategies for their pilgrimage, because word has simply gotten around that the Camino is no longer a secret tip and that it can sometimes get crowded in summer and even in spring. And not everyone is up for that, understandably. That's why I believe that more and more people are thinking about choosing other routes, perhaps other months for their pilgrimage, different overnight stops, or looking for other counter-cyclical strategies. If you'd like some tips from my experience, I've also written 2 ebooks where I share my best advice, and I'll just link them for you again below this video. Yes, and that's it for this rather long video with the analysis of the pilgrim numbers from last year, which is always exciting. I hope you enjoyed the video. I specifically stood outside today to record this video because I find it a bit more fitting and nicer than from inside, since this channel is also about nature and outdoor topics. If you liked the video, then I'd naturally be happy about a thumbs up. And if you leave a short comment under the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you're interested in the topic of the Camino de Santiago. If you're interested in pilgrimages, then feel free to check out my blog. There you'll find lots of info, tips, and personal reports from me and other pilgrims. And you'll also find ebooks for preparation with specific accommodation tips from me and other pilgrims. I'll link all of that below the video. And with that, I'm done for this video and say thanks for watching and see you soon and bye.